They took away straws in California. They made them illegal in some states to serve. It's insane. And they took them away, and we were like, all right. No one asked for proof. No one was like, why are you doing this? And they threw away. They go, turtles. Turtles are dying. And we just were like, oh, okay, seems reasonable. Does it? Where? Where are all these turtles? I'm almost 40. I've seen 6 turtles my whole life. You're telling me millions of turtles are dying with straws lodged in their heads?
That was a clip from comedian Andrew Santino's stand-up comedy that I came across on a YouTube short. And I have a fundamental problem with the way he goes about talking about how a plastic straw would end up in a sea turtle. Now, I get it. It's a comedy bit, and it's supposed to be funny, and it kind of is. I totally get what he's saying. But as a scientist and as a science communicator, I worry that people take comedians a little too seriously and that we put a lot in what they say. We believe in what they say when they start to come out with stuff like this. And that is concerning to me as a scientist and a science communicator. We're going to talk about that on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I am your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And if you are here for the first time or the second or the third, you are here in the right place. This is your ocean resource to find out what you need to know about ocean conservation, marine biology, science, how to protect the ocean. That's what this place is for. And you can get more information over at speakupforblue.com. That's the place. On that website, speakupforblue.com is the place to get more information, more podcast episodes, more videos, more information on the ocean. And if you want to get information to your inbox Monday to Friday, you can do so by signing up and going up to speakupforblue.com/newsletter. That's speakupforblue.com/newsletter. Every day, Monday to Friday, I send you the latest podcast episodes, the latest videos that we've put up, the latest clips from interviews. I send you 3 new ocean news items that are articles that I found on the internet, as well as 3 new jobs that are available in ocean conservation if that interests you as well. So speakupforblue.com/newsletter is where you go. Now today I am going to be talking about how comedy influences communication and messaging, and how as a society we put a lot into our comedians these days. We expect them to be able to push the envelope a little bit in terms of political correctness, but we also have them toe a very fine line, and they can't cross that line. There are some comedians that are very out to do that shock value comedy, and there's others that are traditional and kind of do a little bit of a play on words. There are people who do a lot of dad jokes, and there's comedians for everybody out there. Now, obviously, comedy can go really well, and it can go really badly. Like we've seen recently in political news, we saw that right before the election, that there was a comedian that went up and spoke for Trump's rally, but talked about how there is an island of trash out there, everybody's thinking, oh, the Pacific Gyre, the plastic island. But then started talking about how Puerto Rico is, they insinuated that Puerto Rico is trash. And obviously didn't hit well, as it shouldn't have been, done on a political landscape like it was in front of pretty much the entire country. It went viral, obviously. That comedian probably took a hit from a political standpoint, as well as just sort of like human decency standpoint. Now, some people argue that if he said that in a comedy club, people would have understood. Either way, didn't love the joke. Not a lot of people did. But like I said, comedy can go really badly. People hired him as a comedian and a roasting comedian, a guy who goes up and roasts other people, so insults other people for fun. And like, that's what people expect of him. Not making excuses, but that's what they hired him for. They just didn't do their due diligence and didn't think it would probably land that badly, which was awful. But comedians are all over the place. They can go up and they can go down. And sometimes they're really great. And some people have a little bit more crass in their humor. And some people like it, some people don't. But you get to, go and watch whoever you want. And This comedian that I'm talking about today, Andrew Santino, I think he's a funny comedian in certain aspects. Obviously, everybody's joke, like all the jokes that a comedian puts out, not all of them land and with certain people and others. Like I said before, he does a few racial jokes I'm not a huge fan of. Other jokes he says I like, and so I kind of go back and forth. But he's in my feed for my YouTube Shorts, and I came across this one clip from one of his comedy specials, and I'll link to it in the show notes. This is a YouTube short that I found, and it was really interesting because he's talking about how the plastic in a turtle doesn't add up, and he's referring to the plastic straw that ended up in a sea turtle's nose a number of years ago. This is as I was starting my podcast, I believe, and there was a video that went viral. And I actually know the people who not only filmed the video but took the plastic straw out of the poor turtle's nose. Just a quick situation, quick story of what happened. So there was a research crew off the coast of Costa Rica, just along the coastline. They were looking at sampling and catching and tagging olive ridley sea turtles. Dr. Christine Figgener was one of the researchers that filmed the incident, and Dr. Nathan Robinson was out on the boat on the crew, just helping out as well as looking for information on his study at the time. And we had both of I've had both of Christine as well as Nathan a number of times on the podcast to talk about that situation. Nathan was the first one to come on, and he talked about the whole ordeal and sort of he went through that ordeal. And obviously the video went insanely wild, and it started a new movement of ending single-use plastics. And the plastic straw became that symbol to say, hey, that image of a plastic straw being pulled out of a sea turtle's nose, and the blood that came out of the nose, it was pretty graphic. The blood that came out of the nose, and you can see how much in pain that sea turtle was in, right? That caused a lot of concern, and people use this plastic straw as a symbol for single-use plastics and how we need to stop using single-use plastics, how it can get into the ocean and how it can get into a sea turtle's body. Now, why do we care so much about sea turtles? One, they're an iconic species. There are 7 species. They're found all over the world. They are just gorgeous when you look at them. The people just love them because of the sheer size of them, the way they move. People love turtles, but also that all 7 of them are endangered in some sort of way. And over the last 20 or 24 years, we've really come to understand how far they've traveled with GPS technology and the way that it is, and tagging technology in the way that it is. The first sea turtle ever tagged, which was a friend of the podcast, may he rest in peace, Dr. Wallace J. Nichols. Him and his team tagged a sea turtle, and they watched it go from Baja California to Japan and then back across the Pacific and back. That's how we realize how far these sea turtles travel, how important they will be in every habitat that they land and that they visit on the way there and back from their journey, and how a lot of sea turtles come back to where they nest for a reason. All of Ridley's sea turtles off the coast of Costa Rica, they come to a specific Costa Rican beaches in the hundreds of, and they come in and they lay their eggs and then they go off again. And it's a tourist attraction right now, an ecotourism attraction, watching all these sea turtles come in. And people can walk around as long as they don't disturb the sea turtles, and they can watch all these sea turtles lay eggs. But it's a very delicate procedure. You don't want to scare off the sea turtles. You want to make sure that they come in. And I don't know what the regulations are around sea turtle nesting season for all of Ridley's off the coast of Costa Rica. But after the incident of the sea turtle with the straw in its nose and taken out, 4 months later, Nathan contacted me and he said, hey, Andrew, remember when you said remember when you asked me what are the chances of a sea turtle having a straw in its nose? And I said it was like 1 million or 2 million to 1 because we've never seen it before. Well, he goes, 4 months later, 70 kilometers down the beach, I actually pulled out a plastic fork from a sea turtle, an olive ridley again, in 70 kilometers south of where they were. So obviously it just doesn't happen once. It happens at least twice, we know, but it could happen a lot more. We just don't know why. And there was so Nathan put a video out saying, hey, we think there's a reason why, it's olive Ridley sea turtles, and we haven't seen other sea turtles. Olive Ridley sea turtles tend to be a little bit more adventurous in the type of food that they eat. They are omnivorous. They eat shrimp, and and they think that when a fork or a plastic fork or a plastic straw that is in the water column will get bent out of shape at some point, because it's pretty rough out in the ocean. The salt can break down the plastic a little bit. The sun can break down the plastic. And so a plastic straw that is bent could look like a shrimp, like that hook kind of thing, as well as a plastic fork could look like a shrimp. The olive Ridley sea turtle goes after it, takes a bite of it to test it out, to see what it is, tries to swallow it, can't swallow it, tries to cough it up, realizing it's not a shrimp, and then it goes into its navel cavity instead of coming into its nose, and it gets stuck. Now, the odds of this happening are probably, it's not very low. It's probably quite high, but it still happened twice within a span of 4 months, so that you could almost assume that it could happen more. Probably more studies need to be done to be able to say that specifically, or with any kind of reassurance, but this obviously happened twice, so we know that can happen once. So during this clip, Andrew Santino talks about how it doesn't really add up. How they're saying, hey, he said, I've only seen 6 sea turtles in my entire lifetime. I've never seen one with a straw up its nose. I haven't seen one. So why would I believe you when it says that this is a big problem? Right? Never talking about how these sea turtles are endangered and all the different things that are facing it. Climate change, the fact that they get poached quite a bit, like their eggs get poached quite a bit. Sea turtles get killed quite a bit for food and for tourists, sort of trinkets and things like that. They don't talk about the fact that from hatchling to adult, the odds of getting is 2 to 450 eggs, or that make it to adulthood. There's a lot going against the sea turtle. It's slow growing, so any kind of big movement or big pressure against it could really wipe out a whole generation or a whole nest in one. We just don't know, right? So I understand this is a comedy routine. I totally understand that, and I totally understand how it's like, hey, you know what? It's I don't see it, so why would I believe it? And again, this is the problem here that perpetuates the message that if we don't see it for ourselves, then why would we believe it? We believe whales get stranded because we see whales get stranded, but we don't always see a straw in a sea turtle's nose. We don't always see a fork in a sea turtle's nasal cavity. But it gets there. We've actually seen that on video. It actually gets there. So it's almost safe to assume that it happens more often than we think. We talk about how there are hundreds of thousands of animals that get killed from plastic, but does that mean when scientists come out and say those numbers that people aren't believing it because comedians say, hey, if I don't see it with my own eyes, I don't believe it, right? He even goes into a little bit of a kind of like a skit where he talks about ocean, big currents there, and he talks about kind of in a very Neanderthal kind of voice, and be like, it just doesn't add up. The ocean's such a big place. How can it be so damaged? But again, that's the problem. It is damaged. Microplastics are all over the ocean from top to bottom. And if you see the research that's out there, you understand that that is always going to be a problem, the way that we manage and the way that we use single-use plastics. But here's what I'm worried about. When you see a comedian like this joke about it, does that mean that it becomes people believe that? People are like, oh man, if somebody talks about this, how could they even talk about it? How could they even think that this is a problem? Andrew Santino's right. He is a comedian, right? And a good one at that. It was a funny skit. If you take it for what it's worth, for what it is, it's a little bit that he did and it's funny. I get it. But my concern is that people put so much into comedians. We listen to comedians on podcasts. We see them on videos. We watch them in specials, and we see more and more of these specials coming out. And they comment on, big issues and small issues and environmental issues. And if they continue to comment for that bit to be like, hey, you know what? This could be a problem. I worry that the message gets manipulated. And people are just sea turtles are not being affected by plastic straws. Why do we have to worry about a plastic straw? And I've heard this before. This is why I get worried about this. When Clubhouse was a thing, that Clubhouse, that was an app that you can get on and you can hold rooms and you can have a chat about a specific topic. There was a movie that came out that I'm not even going to name. It was a Netflix movie that had a lot of misinformation in it, and it was supposed to get people to, also name it, Seaspiracy. It was a terrible documentary. It was a lot of misinformation, but they wanted to get people to stop eating fish. And so I held a Clubhouse, I guess, a talk on that discussion about why I didn't like a lot of the messaging that came out of Seaspiracy. And people were coming in and attacking me for this. And I'm like, look, the problem is it wasn't right. Like, if you want people to stop eating fish, that's fine. You can do that. But don't talk about like misinformation, just like people are trying to misinform people about climate change that I talked about on Monday's episode. Like, don't get into all of that. Tell the truth. Like science is science. That's the way it is. If you want to be an advocate and tell people to stop eating fish. There are a lot of reasons why many people can stop eating fish. However, most of the people in the world depend on fish like that as their protein source. So you'll never really get rid of it. And that was the kind of topic that I was talking about. And then people, somehow it got, the conversation got misaligned, and people were talking about, yeah, plastic straws. I don't want to talk about plastic straws anymore. Why do we need to worry about plastic straws? There's the messaging that's a big problem. Plastic straw is like a gateway plastic to the rest of the single-use plastic problem, right? And so having plastic straws, knowing that it affects sea turtles, having a video that it affects sea turtles, right? Maybe we don't have the scientific study that shows that it affects sea turtles on a wider range, but we could assume that plastic kills sea turtles in one way or another, whether it be a straw in its nose or a plastic fork in its nose, or just the fact that it accumulates plastic over time in microplastics. There is a reason. There's significant evidence out there to show that plastics affect a lot of species, not only sea turtles, but marine mammals and fish, sharks, seabirds, and so forth, that will kill hundreds of thousands of animals in the ocean a year. So sea turtles are part of that. But when you have people like, I am sick of hearing about the plastic straw. Why are you sick of hearing it? Is it you just sick of hearing it because you see it everywhere and you want a plastic straw? Or is it because you want to you're just done with it? You're just sick of that feeling because it's inconvenience to you, or you're just sick of that talk? Maybe dive deeper. Maybe as communicators, we need to dive deeper into it and start talking about how it is a gateway plastic, like a gateway drug, right? And that it is a symbol of a larger problem of single-use plastics, right? And that's really where it comes down to. But my worry in this episode that I want to talk about is just kind of nail it home one more time, is that comedians hold a lot of power in today's information highway. If you look at a show like The Daily Show with Jon Stewart and other comedians now, it started off with Jon Stewart. He covers the news, and people rely a lot of times on him talking about the news. That's where they get their news from. But it is a comedy show. He's even said it himself. He goes, I am a comedian giving you information and trying to highlight the hypocrisy of the different news channels out there. But he has his own opinion and he has his own thoughts, and he identifies, and a lot of the comedians that are with him on that team of Comedy Central identify a lot of the hypocrisy, a lot of the misinformation, a lot of the manipulation in the media, according to politics, especially when it comes to politics. And a lot of other shows, John Oliver's show, we had the Colbert Show or Colbert Report back in the day. All those are comedy shows. They're there to highlight the comedic value, but also inform people of some of the stuff that goes on in media as well as politics. And people are well aware now on both sides, whatever part of the aisle you're from in politics, you understand that there are biases in the media, and that definitely highlights it from shows like The Daily Show. But the problem is, it is a comedy show. And a lot of the times when, Jon Stewart has been debating other journalists or so-called journalists, editorial journalists, who also manipulate the message that he makes fun of, he will say, he's like, look, he's like, there are people, people depend on you for the news. He's like, they shouldn't be depending on me for the news. I am a comedian. I am not the news. My show is satire. But over time, that has evolved into, highlighting a lot of really interesting information that people don't know because they're not put in regular media, regular news programs or editorial programs. John Oliver's show is really good at highlighting things. He did a really great piece on deep sea mining that really highlighted information and a lot of the hypocrisy that goes around with certain countries, vying for a spot in starting to mine or discover whether they can mine for deep sea mining sort of metals, right? Even though they know that it's a risk. And it was a great piece. And John Oliver comes up with these pieces every single show. So it's interesting to see how that develops. But again, the problem is like, it is a comedy show. So sometimes they say some ridiculous things. And depending on where you fit on that issue, you may like it or you may not like the stuff that he puts out because it is biased. And the same thing goes back to this, Andrew Santino and the sea turtle and the plastics where it doesn't add up. That's like he equates, and I know this is a comedy, so remember that. And I'm not nearly as good as a comedian as Andrew Santino, but he equates a plastic straw ending up in a sea turtle's nose as, throwing a Q-tip up in the air and catching it and getting inside of his penis. Obviously for a comedic bit, but we know how the straw got into the sea turtle. The sea turtle tried to eat it. It doesn't know the difference. An Olive Ridley sea turtle is experimental in terms of what they try and bite on because they think it's a shrimp or they think it's a crab or they think it's something floating in the water that could look like food. Unfortunately, it's not. It wasn't, and it severely hurt that sea turtle. It would eventually probably have killed the sea turtle if it wasn't for Chris Figener and her team with Dr. Nathan Johnson and Dr. Chris Figener, and to see that they were there to rescue it. That doesn't always happen. So we don't know how many sea turtles have died because of plastic straws or plastic forks or any kind of plastic that they've ingested because they've tried to eat it, right? And this is what I'm worried about. So you know how I feel about this position. I want to know how you feel about this position. Love to hear your thoughts on what you think of plastic straws as a symbol of the larger issue of plastic pollution. Let me know in the comments on Spotify, in the comments on our YouTube, if you're watching this on YouTube. And of course, if you want to hit me up on a DM on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean, I'd love to hear from you. So that's at How to Protect the Ocean. Until next time, I want to thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.